Hi everyone, welcome to the last installment of Global Perspectives on Christianity. Tonight we have John Kalof with us. Woo! He is he is from Egypt, and tonight's is going to be a little different if you've been to some of the other ones. Tonight he's talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how it affects the church. So please be open to what he has to say. It's definitely a different perspective than most of you have grown up hearing or have heard. So without further ado, John Kalof.
Okay. So I'm assuming that most of us have been following, one level or another, following the news, knows what's going on, so we have an idea. So I would like this to be more of a discussion than me speaking, I guess. So can I have everyone bring his phone and look something for me? So we'll start by just because I'm afraid of just saying facts and then people like, where did you get this from? So we'll do it all together. So let's start by looking up Palestinian or Israeli-Palestinian conflict death per month. And just go to pictures and look up the charts. I think that's the best way we can. And death per month. So each, yeah.
Can you spell that?
Death per month.
Per month. Oh,
Yes.
okay.
So, does anyone have a chart where it shows more Israeli death than Israeli? More Israelis than Palestinians? Okay.
Yeah.
So, would we agree that on average there are more deaths on the Palestinian side than on the Israeli? Would anyone disagree? Just give a few more seconds. Okay, I guess we'll agree that for some reason there is on average more death on the Palestinian side than on the Israeli. Well, I remember in school when two kids fight, the teacher would come and look for the person who was hurt the most and punish the other one because I don't know why, but they did that. And I grew up with the mentality that the person who's hurt the most is the weaker part, which usually means it's harder for them to start the fight. If you don't go in a fight, you're not gonna win it. But that's not a logical way, I guess. There are so many dimensions for the truth, and we can't just pick one and go with it. So I think I just asked that so we can understand that we can hear very, very biased news about that. Depends on where you are or where you're gathering your information, you can end up with very, very biased news. So let's look up something else. Statistics on Palestinian minors or teens in Israeli prisons. And let's look. If someone can help us, just say some numbers right now. Statistics on Palestinian minors.
It says there's around 250 in 2018 that are 16 to 18. Minors under that age. Okay, so there's On the statistics that are of 2018, it says there are about 250 between the ages of 16 and 18. And there's about 100 that are under the age of 16. And then there's around 10 that, I don't think they have an age, but they're in admin detention. It seems like a lesser form of prison, but they're still in detention. So that's going to be roughly, you got 500 Palestinian minors in Israeli prisons.
So like in average, there's 50 kids that go to prison. Go for it.
I have a question specifically with regard to the, like how credible any information is that you would get on that subject.
Well, that's why I asked. That's why I didn't bring information, because I can't. The website she showed was, I think this is the same one I have. It's the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories. So I think it's, if you can find other informations, I'm more welcome. Like, I want to hear it. I can't say that I am aware of all the information about this specific topic. So.
I'm also going to ask, I'll make a time for questions at the end, but let's let John get through his points too, unless it's like a clarifying.
Yeah, but it's okay. That's why I specifically asked people to come up with the numbers. So the point I want to make is, for some reason, the Palestinians are hurt more. Can someone look up what, there is an American company that is running all these prisons that detains all the minors. Can someone look up the name? It's a famous Israeli company. Which is an important point, because those kids end up in jail, spending a lot of time seeing that they're being detained by Americans, not Israeli. Or there are Americans involved in one way or another. And that's a big important thing. Kids grow up in prison. There's 50 a month. They have brothers, they have families that are being affected by that. Can also someone look up the numbers for how many Israeli citizens is living in the West Bank? So, as most of us know, there are things that are called settlements, which is basically Israel goes into the Palestinian land, which is called occupied land, and go and build settlements that Israelis would move to live there. And obviously they have to move forces, they have to put police there to protect them. So Palestinians would find police officers walking in their community because there are settlements. Which, by the way, I don't know if you've been following the news, the UN have asked Israel to stop doing that. However, they haven't. It's been, I think that was like the last month when President Obama was still in power, and they didn't use their veto.
Okay, so the numbers I have, it's anywhere between 200,000 to 400,000.
Okay.
People who have, Israelis who have settled in the West Bank.
So that is close to, okay, a lot less than 500,000. And the West Bank is not big. It's not a big area. It's small, which means there is a big ratio between Israeli and Palestinian in the West Bank. We also know that if you just look at the map, most of the area is, like Israel controls most of the total land. So I'm not sure, I guess a question to be asked, why, do they really need to move there? They can't go anywhere else inside Israel to build these settlements? That's another good question. So the one comment I want to make is, the reason Palestinians want to accept the idea of peace, because they can't actually see it on the, like, you can't just say peace and not act in a way that would show that way. Just to support, I guess I don't want to say that I want to say everything from me. So I asked Professor Pate, who lived for an extended amount of time in Israel, to come and explain a little bit about his experience. So. Please welcome Professor Pete.
Okay, so yeah, I lived in Israel for about a year. I was doing a postdoctoral fellowship at Tel Aviv University, which pretty much meant they locked me in a room, said solve math problems for us. So, so I tried to. I didn't do that well actually at it, but I was there. So I don't know that I have necessarily any big sort of grand moral conclusions to make, but just observations I've seen while living there. And for the most part, Israel's a pretty prosperous nation. When you move there, you feel like you're in a European city. There's grocery stores, there's cafes, there's air conditioning pretty much everywhere. There's malls. Probably the things you do notice the most are the people carrying guns. That's the first thing you notice. And they're usually teenagers, oftentimes teenage girls walking around, and they have these big, huge machine guns, which takes a little bit of time to get used to. You also have this experience of wherever you enter a place like a mall, or even sometimes larger stores, there's a security guard who is very diligent to search you. Well, not entirely. I mean, there's a bit of a bit of profiling involved. Let me put it that way. So my wife will go in with our 3-year-old son, no issues at all. I go in, I get maybe a little bit of a harder time, not often, but maybe just a little. If you're when I was at the airport and I'd watch people of Arab descent, including some people from my church who went through the airport while I was there, it was a much more intense experience. For instance, one of the churches I was a part of, while I was in Israel, we had a pastor who came to try to pastor our church. He did for about 3 months, but he had to leave because he had only a tourist visa, but he also had an Arab last name. And so when he arrived back in in Israel, they kind of confined him to the prison there. And an interesting note, he did actually lead his jailkeeper to Christ in somewhat of an amazing sort of New Testament experience sort of thing. But he was sent back, and so kind of what you do see is that life is harder for certain people. Now, one of the common conceptions is that Israel consists of only Jewish people, and that's just not true. There's a very sizable Arab population. And you often find that the Arab population is somewhat segregated from the Jewish population in terms of where they live. So, for instance, there will be cities that are distinctly Jewish cities, and there'll be ones that are distinctly Arab. And there is this tension when people from different backgrounds cross into these cities. Many of the Arab Israelis hold sort of working class jobs in Israel, and so they're more likely to go into a Jewish town, but Jewish Israelis are a little less likely to make it into Arab towns, except maybe for visiting certain sites or things like that. The differences are kind of interesting. You get trained to notice them. Out in the Middle East, how do you heat your water? Well, you stick a tank on your roof because it's so hot. You might as well stick it up there. It's really good at heating it. How do you supplement that heating? Well, if you're a Jewish Israeli, you use a solar panel. If you're an Arab Israeli, you just paint your tank black. It's a little bit of a cheaper way to do it. There is a bit of an economic disparity there, and it's a real thing that just sort of happens there. While I was there, I got to experience the thrill of running away from missiles. So at that time, Hamas was in Gaza, and if you know much about Hamas, they're a fairly ruthless organization, and many of the people in Gaza, I feel suffer quite a bit from their control. They are known for taking people and making them build tunnels and other things against their will, and then killing them after they've done so. very, very brutal, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in Gaza is in support. It's kind of a very, they're as much of victims in many ways as anyone else in that sort of situation. So there's this difficult thing happening in Gaza, and the response to missiles being shot can vary from people to people. People get frustrated by it. I mean, you can be, taking a shower, and next thing you know, the siren goes off, and you've got like 30 seconds to get into the hallway of your apartment building, because that's what's, reinforced. And so, that gets Israelis frustrated, and so that will sort of build up tension, and that will make it hard for people to understand each other and to get along. And of course, for the Gazans, it's a much harder situation. Of course, if a missile's shot from a building, right? What happens? Well, it gets destroyed, and so they lose a lot of their material possessions in the process. And so you find this difficult situation where people are kind of locked in what seems like a never-ending conflict, where they just sort of keep feeling as though they're acting in self-defense towards each other, but in some ways they're kind of really kind of perpetuating it further, and it's hard to know how to deal with this. I thought about this a lot when I heard that missiles were being aimed at nuclear power plants and airports. What do? Do you just let them fly? I mean, what happens if it goes through? It's hard to say, isn't it? It's a difficult thing to sort of come to grips with. I did get a chance to visit Jerusalem, and that was kind of eye-opening because I got to see the Western Jerusalem, which is the Jewish side, and it looks lavish and beautiful. And then you look at the eastern side, and it looks like a bomb went off. It looks like desert and rubble, and it's a difficult thing, of course, to be in the West Bank because the people living there are in a very sort of tenuous spot, right? They're kind of unwanted by pretty much every nation on earth. It's hard to imagine being in a place where absolutely nobody wants you, and that's that's very much the situation that happens there, and it's something that we need to be aware of, what that sort of sensitive to that as Christians, because I don't know if that's a feeling we even really know in a deep way what it's like to live in a place that's not really quite your home, but you're kind of just stuck there. And that's something that as I visited there, I felt much more aware of that. It was much more something I kind of realized. Yeah, this is a difficult spot. I did see some really nice things happen in Israel. I had one friend, Ezra, who was a PhD student at Tel Aviv University, and around that time there was a knife attack. Just so you know, how do these missile attacks happen? There's always kind of a lead up. There's usually some sort of financial signs. You can sort of, when I was living there, the locals would tell me, watch out, the missiles are going to be coming soon. I'm like, how do you know? And they're like, oh, well, we know the bank statements for Hamas. They're running out of money, and they're eventually going to have to start shooting in order to kind of find a way to generate more income, which is shocking to me when it actually did happen, and you get some kind of warning signs right before. So, for instance, in the West Bank, right, there's these Israeli settlements, and there was a murder of some Israeli settlers there. And there was also then sort of a retaliation murder by some of the Israeli settlers against some of the Palestinian settlers. So you get this kind of bloodshed that happens, and it serves as a precursor to these more devastating attacks. And so my friend Ezra, of course, was he was there at that time, and he felt that and he's Jewish too, but he felt that he needed to visit people who were in the hospital. I don't know if it was from that attack in particular or another incident, but there are Israelis, Jewish Israelis, who really want to see peace, and they visit those who have suffered, who are Palestinians, and I thought that was a great moment when he shared that with me. What do you do about it? I don't know. You pray. One of the great experiences I did have was being a part of the international church while I was in Tel Aviv. And it was neat to pray together during this time of conflict. We had Arab believers in our church, we had Jewish believers in our church, and it was a great opportunity to ask for God to help bring peace in that situation. I wish I could sort of tell you that there's always one right side and one wrong side, and in my view it seems that both sides have done things that don't glorify God fully. They both act as oftentimes people do in warlike situations. They drive people from their homes on both sides, and they fight with each other, and they cause conflict. And I really kind of ultimately hope that Christianity will be something that will be more accepted in Israel, and I think it can bring opportunities for people to be able to live at peace with others who are different than them. I will say that one of the surprising things about living in Israel is sort of the hostility towards Christianity. You don't really get that, but it's fine for me to be a Christian. Nobody minds that. But I did have Jewish friends who would worry. If they find out I'm a Christian, I can lose my job. These are very sort of serious things. I've had some Jewish friends ask their friends, so do you think a Jewish person could ever follow Christ, be a believer in Christ? It's a very challenging thing, and it's, as I see it, a spiritual blind spot in a lot of Israeli culture. But at the same time, I try to remember that whatever sort of flaws I may see in others, I have to remember maybe they're present in me too. Maybe I would respond in ways that wouldn't be kind as well. And I kind of have to be humble about that, but also sort of acknowledge when these things do occur. So I don't know if that's what anyone wanted to hear, but that was my experience there. Yeah. There you go, John.
Well, thank you, Professor Pete.
Call me Brandon.
I never call him Professor Pete, so he's confused. Okay, this was great, and I think it allowed us all to get an understanding of what is it like to be there. I don't think any one of us would wish to live in Israel or live in Palestine. I think it's an unfair situation, and can you imagine living in Israel and being expected to be shot at, attacked?
It's actually not such a bad place. But it is worrisome when you ride the bus and then you hear in the news, oh, someone got knifed the other day on your bus line. You kind of worry about that sort of thing. But it is difficult just in the whole region, this tension that exists between these two people.
In the other side, the Palestinian side, it's very sad. It's very awful. You don't have you don't have a government. You're president, and like no one wants to give him power. Basically, no one respects him. No one listens to what he says. So on the other side, like the Palestinians themselves, felt like he's feeling he's useless, and because he's trying to do peaceful things, not like the one before him. So he lost respect at his country. So they feel like no one can fight for him. And they also have Hamas, which is an awful organization. But would you rather be controlled by Hamas or by Israelis? I mean, if you ask any Palestinian, I think it would be a very simple question. Yes, I hate Hamas, but do I have a better choice? So I think what I wanted to come here to share, is that there is an awful, we can't say that there is one good side, one naive side, or one side that is doing everything great, or one side that's doing completely everything awful. Most of us, if they end up growing up in Palestine, would do what Palestinians would do. I mean, go ahead and just take a kid that just learn how to speak and ask him, what's the capital of Israel? Of Palestine, they would say Jerusalem. Ask him his opinion about Israeli, he would say, well, they just came and conquered our land. And hopefully we'll kick them out one day. Just 1 year old. Okay. So that's what the mentality they grew up in. And can you blame them? I don't think so. I want to ask one question to you guys. And I'm glad that Professor Pierce is here, because that might be a kind of historical point. Why why always Jews are always finding themselves in a, like history tells us that they received so many discriminations in Europe, in the Middle East. Why the specific group? Can anyone find a specific point? I don't know, Dr. Pierce, if you have a...
Easy question, right?
Like, what's about them?
Okay.
As short as you can.
As short as I can. Okay, maybe 3 minutes. There's basically 3 stages, and I'll do 1 minute each.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, stage 1, ancient world, Thank you. Roman Empire. Of all the peoples in the Roman Empire, the Jews just don't fit in because their whole manner of life is so distinctive. The Romans actually had to make very grumpily and grudgingly, they had to give them an exemption from giving divine honours to the Roman emperors or to the Roman gods, because they simply wouldn't do it, and you'd have to fight and kill them all, and they fought quite well. Okay, you get beyond the Roman period, because they predate Christianity. They're the only group of people in diaspora who are not required to be Christians. I know that whole way of talking is nonsense to us, but in terms of Christendom, that was how it was understood. But then they were constantly mistreated, so they stand out. They are not able to be part of the normal social systems in medieval and early modern Christendom. And so how do you keep yourself alive? Well, you have mobile wealth, cash, and you are engaged in trade. It's the glory of capitalism. Nobody's got to like you. If you're offering something a little cheaper and a little higher quality than the person next to you, they'll do the deal. I mean, America is built on precisely that, with a whole load of religious minorities, right? But that means that when modernity comes along, Jews are particularly well placed to benefit from modernizing processes. And then they get resentment from that in the modern period because they stand out as conspicuously wealthy, or they're way overrepresented in modern professions like law and journalism and everything else. So yeah, in all of those 3 periods, they have stood out as targets for persecution. They've received it. The culmination of that, of course, is with the ghastly events of World War II. Though, as I was just pointing out to some students this week in class, the simplistic way in which World War II gets taught in our schools, you think that was what the war was about. No, it wasn't. Most people in the Western alliances didn't even know that what had happened until after the war was over. And the whole terminology around the Holocaust wasn't the Holocaust until the 1970s, right? Anti-Semitism remained rife, including in this country, at least until the early 60s. Obviously, it's still always present, but very common until then. But by then, of course, you've got a state of Israel, but it's founded on the basis of Jewish nationalism. Again, don't read back the current strong element of religious life in Israel now back into Israel's founding. It was nothing increases nationalism like the other guy's nationalism, right? Seriously, and this is with respect of all groups. And by the end of the 19th century, Theodor Herzl in Budapest went to the square where, right, named after him there, okay, right, forms modern Jewish nationalism. And like all nationalisms in the 19th century, it is secular and was disapproved of by the religious authorities. So Israel is founded as a nationalist and secular state. But the religious element has become more important as we go along, and of course, as we find everywhere, including here, religious people tend to breed faster, and because they believe in retrograde fascistic things like getting married and having children. But and this is just kind of true globally. In any case, I mean, Israel is in a demographic pinch. The average age of Palestinians is 15. The average age of Israelis is 39. How do you think that's going to work out? Right, so the Israelis can't do without those religious people, and then they're in any case becoming an ever larger share of the population. So, right, I'm done. I'll get out of your way.
I would like to add one thing to that. Just from my understanding and some of the things I've collected over the years, for economical reasons, obviously Christianity talks against giving financial loans with interest. Also Muslims. So in Europe and the Middle East, the only group of people who were allowed or had an opportunity or didn't have a religious obligation against the business market was Jews. Would you agree with me? So Christians and Muslims have a religion obligation to not give loans with interest. But Jews don't have that issue. So for a while, at least in the Middle East, I know for a little bit sometime in Europe, the Jews, it was an open market for them. Give loans, and when people don't pay, then you can take his property or whatever he promised to give if he didn't pay. Also, Jews in the Middle East owned every single source of alcohols. Wherever, if you wanted to buy alcohols, you find where Jews are, right? Because at least in Egypt, Coptics basically spoke against the consumption of alcohols, and also Muslims. So that was a big thing. So Jews, at least in the Middle East, were known for business market, which means they owned a lot of money and they manipulated people. And I mean, I'm not trying to speak negatively about Jews, but it's just the mentality that was kind of left, that kind of stood out. And also they owned the places where you go and get drunk and do bad things. So for many reasons, the Jews found themselves be hated, rejected. And I mean, do you really, as long as I feel like as long as you live in a mentality of a victim, you cannot be a normal person. You can't pursue life normally. So living in Israel, being Jews, knowing that for centuries we are victims and we did nothing wrong but being us. Somehow we end up on the wrong side of the equation. When you are a victim, you need to hate someone. You need to blame someone. You need to, have own power on someone, I think. I think to me,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. So Arabs also grew up with knowing the recent history that this land was owned completely by Arabs, and somehow we made a deal with British, and we did great things together. And while they are leading our armies, while the Arab armies were led by British police officers to give them intelligence and stuff, they were fighting the Israeli, and somehow they find themselves losing. And they find that the British were also working with the Israeli. So they felt like, no, we didn't lose the war. People made fun. We were dragged into a war where we can't win. So that's an important thing that Arabs know well. And obviously, they will never surrender to the fact that, okay, we had a war and we lost it. They also know that the Israeli won't stop at a specific point. They will keep going. They want to take more and more. How do you know? Well, the settlements. They have, obviously, if they have the settlement, they have to have police, and they have some sort of control over the West Bank. I mean, if you are walking around, you will find many checkpoints. You would agree with me?
Yeah.
Yeah, where women basically will be asked to go to a specific room and take all of her clothes off. I don't know how many of us would like to have that happen to him on a daily basis. Or sometimes you can enter the great mosque today for some people. So the idea why Palestinians won't accept that maybe we can have peace, because they can't see that if we surrender, we'll be taken over. If we stop fighting, we will lose everything. I think this is the mentality that the Palestinians have. And the one last thing I want to speak about, the problem is keep growing because the way both Israel and Palestinians are supported. So Israel is receiving a lot of support by European and American, I think to me mostly Protestant. I mean, I've entered so many churches where they have the American flag and the Israeli flag. I've entered so many, I don't know, I think I've been to more churches that have the Israeli flag than churches that didn't have, for some reason. I don't know if it just like stands out to me, like I'm I don't know.
They heard you were coming.
Yeah, that's probably. So, because the Israelis know that they have enough support and they don't need to make peace with the Palestinian Israel. They don't need to. I guess they would like the idea of peace, but what comes with peace, like agreeing on like a middle ground, I think that the Israelis don't want to, because they're receiving all the support they have, and they know that they can gain more support because they have stronger relationship with more people in power everywhere. So the idea of giving a few things here and there for the Palestinians is not an option. I think that's my opinion. The Palestinians, on the other hand, are receiving lots of financial support from many different countries, which is if we stop fighting, there is no need for the financial need that we are getting, so we're going to lose the money. So we are obligated to fight for our income. So that's a big note. And I think as long as both countries receive very, very biased support from two sides, that's going to keep the two countries in war. I think and I believe if we just leave them alone, maybe they're going to go crazy for a little bit, but then they're going to find a middle ground. That's my opinion in general. I don't know. I would like to hear questions, I guess, or comments.
So, you did mention how lots of churches have these Israeli flags next to American flags. How do you think it would be good? Good, American flag. How do you think we can maybe raise more awareness about the impact of this conflict with, especially American Protestant churches that really take this Israeli nationalism as an article of faith? Because I know that can be a real roadblock to opening that dialogue.
Yeah, so obviously the problem is that the Protestant churches wanted to make peace with Jews, especially after the World War I and II. So they supported them, and I guess if I'm a preacher and I want to tell my people that, hey, let's make peace with Jews, look, they are mentioned in the Bible. I mean, do you know how many times in sermons back home in Egypt we mention how many times Egypt is mentioned in the Bible? It's just a normal thing. If you're mentioned in the Bible, that's a good thing. So Protestant churches, I guess, went, okay, we want to support Israeli. Let's read this verse that talks about Israel. So I think that's a big issue that, like I've talked with, I had conversation with some of my friends who are like, yeah, but God gives them promises. Gave to who? To the Israeli. Which Israelis? Did you just read that? Did not read about the other promises of God that they will be taken out of their land, they would lose it? That was God's decision. Why do we need to undo what God did? I don't understand that. I don't know how can we convince churches to not preach this way. But I know that it's becoming less and less, and I think our generation is becoming less affected by that. I'm very sure.
I think some of that discussion, John, revolves around a theology an interpretation of Scripture that looks at Israel as the promised, the chosen people, and then the importance of supporting that. And so you'll hear that preached in a lot of churches. So, and I honestly don't know where I stand on that whole thing, so I won't give you an answer.
I think also Western Jewish Israelis are much more like Western Europeans than Palestinians are, and we're much more likely to look at them and say, well, they're like us, and that makes them more familiar to us. We're more inclined to be supportive. There's kind of a bias there because of that. I mean, for me, I know lots of people who are Americans and Israelis and sort of a dual citizenship. And so I oftentimes find myself sort of viewing them also as, my fellow citizens too. And so there's that kind of blurring, and it's very common in Israel. Here in Western New York, you guys just don't really have like a strong Jewish center, do you? But if you're in other places, yeah, right. So I did my PhD in New Jersey. I actually lived in a predominantly Jewish town in New Jersey. My neighbors would have to during Passover and stuff. Jewish neighbors would ask their Gentile friends, "Could you turn on my oven for me? I'm not supposed to do work during this holy day." So they would come in and turn their oven on for them, and come out and turn it off because you're not supposed to do work. But making the person next door do work, that's okay. And so anyways, all that to say, I found myself living in a little bit of that sort of culture just by happenstance. And because of that, you end up just sort of not necessarily thinking about some of the difficult things that have happened. I had an interesting conversation with my landlord when I was in Israel. We were talking about this once, and we were talking about what happened during the Israeli independence. You can read some websites and they'll say things like, "Oh, all the Arab people, they just left willingly. What's the West Bank?" And then that sort of, we're waiting for the reinforcements to arrive and pulverize them. But he told me, no, my grandfather in Hashar, in the town over there, he drove them out. He with both other people grabbed their guns and made them leave. And when you hear that from your landlord, someone who I known for a while, I wasn't necessarily his friend or anything, but someone I was familiar with, I had to sort of say, wow, that sounds pretty rough. To do that. And I also understand that in war, things like that happen, and it's not always lots of things that we would normally not do happen in war, but it was still hard for me to accept that and understand what it meant.
Sorry, John, I showed up a little late.
It's okay. I can send you the recording later.
Say that again?
I can send you the recordings later.
Oh,
Okay,
this is
thank
being
you.
recorded.
Yeah?
I do have a question. It's kind of hard to ask because it's so complex. The nation of Israel in of itself, we probably already talked about this before I showed up, so my apologies. But do the Jews have the right to have the land as theirs, like as a nation of Israel? If that makes any sense.
Okay, I don't know who can answer that, but okay, I would say my opinion. I guess if you are standing on the side like where Jews are, they lived in this land for the longest time and they owned it and things like that, I would say, okay, cool. Jews were Middle Eastern at one point, right? You all agree? Yes. What does Middle Easterns look like? Do they have green eyes? Do they have red hair? I mean, Brandon.
This is actually really interesting. So there are different types of Jewish ethnicities. Ashkenazi Jews are the ones we're most familiar with. They're from Eastern Europe, or parts of Western Europe. they're the ones we're most familiar with. There actually is a surprisingly large population of Middle Eastern Jews who arrived at the founding of Israel. Many of them were from nearby Middle Eastern countries, and they look more like John than many other what we typically think of. Now, there is variance. You know, if you go to a more urban setting and you go to a place like Tel Aviv, where I live, you're going to see the red hair, the green eyes very frequently. But if you go to other areas, it's actually surprising how you'll talk to these people. They'll say, "Oh yeah, our family was from Lebanon, but we moved here once Israel was established." Or, "Oh, my family was from one of these other sort of nearby Middle Eastern nations." So it's actually really complicated. And actually, if you want to get even more interesting, there's like little bit of hostility sometimes between these different Jewish sub-ethnicities.
Only a little bit. It's calmed down.
Yeah. It's really fascinating living there and just sort of realizing just how different it is than what you expect.
One of my major consolations about loads of these arguments that rage around ethnicities, one of my major consolations about modern technology is that none of these stupid arguments will survive widespread DNA testing. This is the firm ground on which I'm constantly ridiculing racism of all kinds and in all directions. It's ludicrous. And certainly that would be true here as anywhere else. You know. And if you want to say, well, even if you wanted to ignore that extremely large point, do they have a right to establish it? Well, did Europeans have a right to come here and establish America, whether as colonies or later on as the United States? I'm from England. Should my ancestors who went there, go in the 5th century, go back to North Germany where they came from? I mean, there's simply no answer to these questions. That doesn't mean that states in the present should have open doors immigration policies, because who are we after all? I mean, the anarchist argument, all property is theft, the best answer to it is actually, yeah, that's quite right. But even the poorest person in the world is better off because property exists. Because without it, all of our lives are nasty, brutish, and short. You keep moving forward from that. And you kept these discussions about states. So yeah, I mean, there isn't any very obvious answer there. If you're at the sharp end of, Jews are coming in from all over the place to oust the native peoples in Palestine, well, then they're going to resist, and they should. And whatever state they're in should assist them in that process. But that's all happened now. That's, whether rightly or wrongly, it's changed. But if you want to go into the rights and wrongs of it, then none of us, unless you are 100% descended from Dakota Indians or something, you've got a right to be here right
now. I also want to say something. We can't ask this question without asking what would happen to the people who already in that land. Like, we can't. I think we can't ask that question without asking the other one. I mean, in the Bible, we have this very good account of how Israelis end up being in that place. They kicked out people from where they lived, and they took over the land. It's not a story that we today feel like, wow, this is cool. No, no, we don't go say, praise God, they killed those people. I mean, maybe some would say, I certainly wouldn't. And the reason is because we as Christians today, we have a new account, we have a New Testament. And God progressed us from the need to fight. Let's look at the New Testament. Where does it say fight? Nowhere. So God led us to the reality where we don't have to force or establish a specific land. We don't have, race is not a thing anymore where Jews were always a group who can follow God. That's I think that's been broken since the New Testament. So.
Build on that.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm just going to say to build on that, what the New Testament says is that our kingdom isn't of this earth, it's heaven. And so, we're passing through. It's interesting how the focus on the land in the Old Testament has moved to heaven in the New Testament. So I think you make a good point.
Okay, one more question.
Is it okay if I ask two? One that is serious and one that is kind of silly, but I want an answer for?
Go for it.
It's kind of similar to the question that I already asked. What do you think of the Balfour Declaration?
I don't know.
Okay.
No, I didn't follow that.
Do you know what it is?
Not sure.
Yeah, can you explain to him what it is, maybe? Because he probably would have an opinion if he knew.
The Balfour Declaration, all the history majors here, correct me if I'm wrong, was when the world as a whole, Western civilizations, decided to say, we're going to allow Israel to be a nation once more. We're declaring them as a nation again.
Yeah, where is it declared it?
I think Pierce is in pain. He might
Well, scholar, where is it declared?
British official after the British captured Jerusalem from the Ottomans in 1917. Basically, Balfour spoke really on behalf of the British government of the day, that it was the purpose of the British government in the fullness of time to create a national homeland for the Jews. Even though the British intended, having grabbed Palestine, to hang on to it for a while, which they got kind of international legalization for the British mandate after World War I was over. And so the interwar period sees significant, but not absolutely massive, immigration of Jews into Palestine. And then the British kind of easily holding the ring because the locals were resenting that. Jews wanted to assert themselves more. I speak with a little feeling here. My father on the one hand and one of my uncles on the other were part of the British forces right after World War II and before the Israeli independence in 1948, trying to keep both sides apart, being thanked by both sides by being shot at by both sides. It was so the legacy about the Balfour Declaration is simply a statement of intent for the long term, which wasn't then fulfilled for another 31 years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, can I also say one thing? What would you feel if Egyptian made a decision to give his patent to Native American? That's nonsense. The British worked with the Arabs to kick the Ottoman Empire out of their land. So they worked and they achieved that. And they promised them for the Arabs to keep their land. Instead, they did an illegal movement, that's what I would call it, and a deceitful movement by declaring that, making the decision. Which doesn't make much sense to me. But that doesn't mean that it became part of history, and we made so many things that are illegal. We can't just we're gonna go back and fix everything in the back. So we have to account for it somehow. Well, I think we about to wrap up, right? Yeah. So thank you guys for coming.
The silly question? Yeah.
Oh, there was another question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Take it.
I hear a lot of people, especially, not mainly academics, but a lot of my family members who are Christians, they'll say that when Israel became a nation again, that was fulfilling a end-time prophecy saying that the nation of Israel becomes a nation again. That generation that witnesses Israel become a nation again would be the generation that witnesses Christ's return. So I don't know what to think about that. What do you think about that?
Show me in the Bible.
I just heard that. I don't know.
I think they're in the Book of Revelation. I think that's where this come when Jerusalem will be reestablished again. Then
The temple.
the temple. Yeah, all sorts of things. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is in the Book of Revelation, which a lot of theologians would say that these are all symbological, like it's not specific statement. Also, realistically, so obviously when these promises were made, they were made to the nation. They were made to the nation that is specifically the Israeli race, the Jew race. How can you trace down who's actually Jew and who's not? So you can actually collect them. I don't know. I think it's a dilemma here. So yeah, I don't think you'll find a good answer. But yeah.
That's why I thought it was a silly question.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, I want to end with one thing. This is an ongoing issue, and as long as we take one side, we fight for one side, this is never going to be solved. As long unless there is a conversation, there is when I'm thinking about whom I'm supporting, I'm also thinking about who's the other person I'm supporting. Americans feel like Israel is like their awkward adopted son for somehow, and they like to give them all the support they need. But it's like you have two kids and you're always coming on one of the kids' side. Let's say you have one kid that is very smart, very honest, everything, and you have a kid that is a bad kid. Let's say the bad kid is in Palestine, and I have a good kid. Even most of the issues are going to come up. Even let's just assume that the Palestinians the bad kid is always causing the problems. Let's just say that. You cannot always stay on the good kid's side. That's just like if you're a parent, you won't do that. You will teach the good kid to be sensitive to his other brother who have specific limitations. You will let them figure it out together. So as long as we are picking one side, I think this is going to always be an ongoing issue. So thank you guys for coming, and I really appreciate it.